Imagine standing right there at the dawn of Christianity. What do you think you'd actually see?
Probably something quite focused, right?
Exactly. A relatively small, tightly knit Jewish group, maybe meeting in the temple in Jerusalem.
Following the law.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Now, picture yourself fast-forwarding through centuries, bouncing across continents. You'd be witnessing just wildly different expressions of this faith.
It's quite a mental journey.
Isn't it? You've got, say, Irish monks standing neck-deep in icy water reciting psalms.
Right. Intense asceticism.
Then jump to London evangelicals in the 1840s promoting, well, Christianity, commerce, and civilization in Africa. Very different vibe.
Completely different priorities, seemingly.
And then maybe land in vibrant Nigerian churches today, focusing intensely on healing, on personal vision.
A real kaleidoscope, as you said.
It really is. So the big question, the fundamental one, is how can these incredibly diverse groups, separated by centuries, by geography, by culture, all legitimately claim the same Christian identity?
Yeah, what holds it all together? What makes it Christianity?
Exactly. What makes Christianity, well, Christian? So today we're taking a deep dive into a really incredibly insightful work. It's called Missionary Movement in Christian History, Studies in the Transmission of Faith.
A classic text in the field.
It really is. And this book, it isn't just a historical recounting. It genuinely invites us to rake over the embers of the past, which I think is such a vivid phrase.
It is. It suggests digging beneath the surface.
Yes, really understanding the profound, sometimes frankly astonishing transformations Christianity has undergone, and how, maybe against all odds, it manages to stay coherent despite this incredible adaptability.
And that's really our mission for this deep dive, isn't it? To explore Christianity's inherent, almost you could say built-in ability to translate itself across cultures, across time.
This idea of translation being key.
Absolutely. And you're going to discover, hopefully, some surprising continuities that are often hidden, maybe buried beneath layers of really radical change.
And so it's not just constant flux.
No. It's a story of constant adaptation, yes, and deeply local expressions, definitely. But there's also this tenacious, unifying core that seems to have allowed this faith to become truly global, endlessly adaptable. So by the end of our conversation, you should gain a fresh perspective on what it means for a faith to be both universal and deeply rooted in specific contexts. It might challenge some common assumptions about what Christianity even looks like.
Okay, let's really lean into this then. The source material gives us this truly imaginative way to grasp the sheer scope of Christian history. It uses this analogy almost like we're detached observers.
It's a spaceman analogy.
Exactly. So imagine, if you will, you're a spaceman, an alien observer, visiting Earth at different points in time, trying to make sense of these Christians.
Okay, I'm with you. An anthropological study from orbit.
Sort of.
Yeah.
What startling differences and maybe what subtle commonalities would this observer notice?
Where's the first stop?
First stop for our interstellar traveler, Jerusalem, around, say, 37 CE. What does a spaceman observe?
Okay, early days. Very early.
Very. They see a group of humans, all of whom are identifiably Jewish. They're meeting in the temple, a sacred space only open to Jews.
Right, central to Jewish life, then.
And they're offering animal sacrifices, a deeply embedded practice. They're punctiliously observing the Sabbath, refraining from work, circumcising male children according to ancient tradition.
So standard Jewish practice for the time.
Pretty much. To our alien observer, they would appear to be just one of several denominations of Judaism, maybe a new sect.
So what makes them distinct?
Their key distinction, it seems, is that they identify the figures of Messiah, Son of Man, and Suffering Servant, all figures described in their ancient law books, with a recent prophet teacher, a man named Jesus of Nazareth, whom they believe has inaugurated the last days. They live pretty normal family lives, big families, close-knit social organization, lots of common meals in each other's houses.
So community is central.
Very. The dominant impression our spacemen would take away is one of law and joyful observance. What strikes me there is just how Jewish early Christianity was. It really challenges many of our modern assumptions right off the bat.
Definitely sets a baseline that's maybe unfamiliar to many people today.
Now, let's jump forward dramatically. Almost 3 centuries. It's 325 CE. Our spaceman is observing a huge meeting of church leaders. Maybe it's the Council of Nicaea itself.
A pivotal moment.
Hugely pivotal. And the scene is vastly, just astonishingly different.
How so?
Well, the attendees, they come from all over the Mediterranean world, even beyond, from distant corners of the Roman Empire. But here's the thing. Hardly any of them are Jewish.
Wow, that's a massive shift already.
Isn't it? In fact, our observer notes they seem rather hostile to Jews, and the very thought of animal sacrifices horrifies them.
So that core practice is gone.
Completely gone. When they talk about offering sacrifices, they mean bread and wine, used in a way that maybe vaguely recalls those house meals in Jerusalem, but it's clearly distinct in form and significance.
The Eucharist, essentially.
Right. And these church leaders, they don't have children themselves. They're not expected to marry, and most actually regard marriage as an inferior, kind of morally compromised state.
Celibacy is becoming the ideal for leadership.
Yes. And they'd be appalled by any parent who circumcised their children. They'd see it as a betrayal of faith, almost unchristian.
So another core Jewish marker is now seen negatively.
Exactly. They treat the seventh day, the old Sabbath, as just an ordinary working day. Their special religious observances are on the first day, Sunday, but importantly, without abstaining from work like the Jewish Sabbath.
The Lord's Day focus.
Right. They do use the same law books as the Jerusalem Christians, the Hebrew scriptures, but now they're using them in Greek translation, the Septuagint.
Which we'll probably talk more about later.
Definitely. The titles Messiah, Son of Man, Suffering Servant are known, but Messiah Christos, in Greek, has almost become Jesus' surname. The others are hardly used.
Interesting how titles shift emphasis.
And they give equal value to another set of writings, the New Testament, which wasn't even composed when those Jerusalem Christians met. And they prefer titles like Son of God and Lord for Jesus.
So new scriptures, new titles, new practices.
The sheer cultural and conceptual distance from that original Jewish group is just, well, it's astounding, isn't it?
It really is. Hard to even connect the two without knowing the history in between.
Okay, let's move forward again. Another 3 centuries or so to about 600 CE. Our spaceman travels to Ireland.
Okay, moving to the fringes of the known world at that time.
Exactly. The scene is stark, very alien compared to Nicaea. You've got a number of monks gathered on a rocky, windswept coastline.
The Celtic monks?
Yes. Several are standing in ice-cold water up to the necks, reciting psalms, their breath misting in the air.
Extreme asceticism, wow.
Right. Some are standing immobile for hours, praying with arms outstretched in the form of a cross. A grueling posture of devotion.
That sounds incredibly difficult.
You see one monk receiving 6 strokes of the lash because he didn't answer amen when grace was said at their last meal, brown bread and dulse, probably.
Strict discipline.
Very. Others are heading off in a small, flimsy-looking boat, a coracle, in doubtful weather. They've got a box of beautiful, hand-illuminated manuscripts and little else.
The Peregrini, the wandering monks.
Precisely. They intend to distribute themselves on remote islands, maybe in the Firth of Clyde, calling the astonished, nature-worshipping inhabitants there to give up their old ways and seek joy in a future heavenly kingdom.
It's a truly ascetic, yet fiercely zealous picture of faith, isn't it?
Totally. Makes you wonder how those, well-robed Nician bishops would have reacted to this expression of holiness.
Probably with some confusion, maybe even disapproval.
I'd imagine so. Okay, our spaceman delays the next visit for quite a while to the 1840s, arriving in bustling industrial London.
Big jump again, into the modern era, relatively speaking.
Right into the heart of the British Empire. Here, they find a large and visibly excited assembly in Exeter Hall, a famous venue for public meetings.
Okay, what's the focus here?
Speakers are passionately promoting Christianity, commerce, and civilization in Africa. They're proposing sending missionaries armed with Bibles and cotton seeds thousands of miles away.
The 3 C's, a very Victorian concept.
Very. They're also advocating for a deputation to the British government about putting down the slave trade, raising subscriptions for educating black mechanics, publishing countless letters, pamphlets, articles to stir public support.
So very outward-looking, very activist.
Extremely. The meeting began with a reading from the same book, now in English translation, that all the previous Christians used, and many in the assembly carry it. They accept the Nicene Creed without question.
So, continuity in text and creed.
Yes, but like the Irish, they use the word holy quite a lot, but they would be utterly aghast at the idea that holiness could involve standing in cold water or praying in an isolated cave.
A different understanding of holiness, clearly.
Completely. While the Irish monks sought to live on as little as possible, this group looks remarkably well-fed, dressed in the latest fashions. What most impresses our outsider is their palpable activism and the involvement of their religion in all processes of life and society.
A stark contrast to the inward monastic focus we saw in Ireland.
Night and day. Okay, one final leap for our spaceman. To 1980. Lagos, Nigeria.
Into contemporary African Christianity.
Yes, observing a vibrant cherubim and seraphim church. This group, too, accepts the Nicene Creed if you show them the document in a prayer book, but they display very little intellectual interest in it.
More experiential, perhaps?
Seems so. They appear somewhat vague about the relationship of the Divine Son and the Holy Spirit, according to our observer. They're not politically active like the Exeter Hall folks were. That whole lifestyle seems quite foreign to them.
Different context, different concerns.
Exactly. They fast, like the Irish monks did, but only on fixed occasions and for fixed purposes, often related to specific spiritual needs, maybe healing or guidance.
A practical application of fasting.
Right. The characteristic that most readily springs to the spaceman's mind, the overriding impression, is their deep concern with power.
Power. In what sense?
Power as revealed vibrantly in dynamic preaching, in miraculous healing, and in vivid personal visions. It's a raw, immediate, deeply experiential form of faith.
Fascinating. So 5 snapshots, radically different expressions.
Radically different.
So after, correlating all these incredibly diverse observations back on their home planet, our spaceman scholar faces a pretty profound question. It's not just that these 5 groups, all claiming to be Christians, seem concerned about vastly different things. I mean, the concerns of one group might even seem suspect or downright repellent to another.
Yeah, the Irish monks and the London businessmen might not have seen eye to eye on holiness.
Probably not. But what's crucial here, and the source emphasizes this, is that none of these were freakish examples or, fringe groups.
They were mainstream for their time and place.
Exactly. Our spacemen observed groups that were truly representative of Christians of their respective times and places, residing in what were considered the Christian heartlands of those very periods.
That's a really important point. These aren't outliers.
Not at all. And think about the geographical shifts involved. In 37 CE, most Christians were Jews. Jerusalem was the undisputed center.
Okay.
By 325 CE, few Christians were Jews. The Eastern Mediterranean, Greek-speaking, had become the main hub, the intellectual and spiritual powerhouse.
Right, the shift east.
Then, by 600 CE, the balance shifts dramatically westward to the northern and western tribal peoples. Ireland emerges as this power center of monasticism, missionary zeal.
The Celtic expansion.
Then in the 1840s, Great Britain is certainly among the outstanding Christian nations, especially tied to global expansion through its empire.
The Exeter Hall picture.
And by 1980, the balance has shifted decisively southwards. Africa is now the continent most notable for its huge number of professing Christians, a massive demographic shift.
Wow, so the center of gravity just keeps moving.
Constantly. This dramatic geographical and cultural journey utterly counters any static, linear, or frankly solely Western-centric idea of Christianity's progression. It's a living, moving, adapting phenomenon.
It breathes with the cultures it enters.
Precisely. And our spaceman, being a good scholar, might even recall that provocative remark by Gilbert Murray.
Yeah, was that again?
He suggested, somewhat controversially, that representative Christians from, say, the 3rd, 13th, and 20th centuries might actually have less in common in terms of their lived experience and daily concerns than maybe a Catholic, a Methodist, and a freethinker do today. Or even he pushed it further, less in common than with a well-educated Buddhist or Brahmin today.
That really makes you think.
It does. It raises this important, maybe unsettling question for us. Does this startling diversity mean that shared religion is ultimately just a function of shared culture? Just a thin veneer over underlying cultural identities?
So, if that's what these incredible, almost unrecognizable transformations, then the truly baffling question remains. How? How does Christianity maintain any kind of coherence across these vastly different expressions? Is there any unifying thread at all?
Yeah, where's the glue?
Right. What holds it together?
Well, what's truly fascinating here, and this is where the analysis gets really interesting, is that despite this wild profusion of differences, our observer can discern profound underlying continuity.
Okay, so it's not just difference, there's something consistent.
Absolutely. It's not just a random collection of phenomena. First, there's a clear, demonstrable historical connection. A lineage, if you like.
How so?
Well, the Christians scattered from Jerusalem first preached to Greeks, right? They founded that vast Greek edifice we saw observed in 325 CE.
Okay, connection 1.
Then Eastern Christianity, in turn, passed on important features and, spiritual power to Celtic Christian religion.
So Greece influences Ireland.
In significant ways, yes. and that Celtic religion played a vital part in the gradual emergence of the kind of religion expressed later at Exeter Hall, influencing its zeal, its structures maybe.
Okay, the chain continues.
And finally, the Cherubim and Seraphim Church in Lagos in 1980. It's ultimately a result of the very operations discussed at that Exeter Hall meeting. It's a direct consequence of the modern missionary movement that those Londoners were promoting.
So there's a demonstrable chain of transmission. It's not just random similarities.
Exactly. It's not a series of disconnected events. There's a real historical flow.
Okay, that's the historical link. What else?
Well, beyond this historical lineage, a closer look reveals other definite signs of continuity. Across all these varying statements and groups, there is one unvarying theme that seems to transcend cultural expression.
And that is?
The ultimate significance of Jesus called the Christ. Regardless of how it's articulated, what titles are preferred, or what specific challenges are being addressed in that culture, Jesus remains absolutely central to their understanding of God and humanity.
The constant focal point.
The constant focal point. Then, in the institutional sphere, you see all these groups across millennia using the same sacred writings, the scriptures.
Even if in translation.
Yes. Even if they're in different languages and translations, the Hebrew Bible and the New Testament form a common textual basis. And they all use bread and wine and water in a special symbolic way.
The sacraments or ordinances.
Right. These rituals endure across the ages, even as their specific meaning and practice might evolve within different cultural contexts.
Interesting. So Jesus, scripture, sacraments. What else?
Perhaps even more remarkable is the continuity of consciousness, a shared identity.
How does that manifest?
Each group, despite being so different in time and place, and often, frankly, out of sympathy with the main concerns of the others.
Like the monks and the merchants?
Exactly. Each still thinks of itself as having some kind of community, some connection with the others. There's a shared sense of belonging to something larger than their local expression.
A sense of the universal church, maybe?
In some form, yes. And even more astonishing, perhaps, each group thinks of itself as being, in some respect, continuous with ancient Israel.
Even the non-Jewish groups.
Even though only the first group in Jerusalem had any conceivable ethnic reason to do so, and some of the later groups must have found it extremely hard to even form a clear concept of what ancient Israel was, or what a Jew might be.
Yet they claim that heritage.
They see themselves as heirs to that ancient story, grafted in, you might say.
So the observer, our spaceman, is led to recognize an essential continuity here.
Definitely. A continuity of thought about the final significance of Jesus, a continuity of a certain consciousness about history and Israel, and continuity in using the scriptures, bread, wine, and water.
But there's always a but, isn't there?
There is, and this is absolutely crucial. These continuities are often cloaked with such heavy veils belonging to their environment.
Veils of culture.
Exactly, that Christians of different times and places must often be unrecognizable to others, or indeed even to themselves, as manifestations of a single phenomenon.
Wow. So the cultural expression can be so thick, so different, that the underlying connection is hidden, even from other Christians.
Precisely. This profound tension, this ability to be both radically contextual and fundamentally coherent, is absolutely key to understanding Christianity's global journey and its enduring, adaptable presence.
That's a powerful image. These heavy veils of culture cloaking the underlying continuities. So how does Christianity manage this balancing act? To be so adaptable, so thoroughly at home in vastly different cultures, yet remain coherent, maintaining this underlying identity.
Yeah, what's the engine driving this?
Our source material points to two opposing tendencies that are perhaps surprisingly inherent in the gospel itself, almost like two driving forces pulling in different directions, but somehow working together.
That's a brilliant way to frame it. And understanding this tension, this dynamic interplay, is absolutely key to grasping Christianity's global adaptability. It's built into the core message.
Okay, so what are these two tendencies?
On one hand, you have what the source calls the indigenizing principle. This principle asserts that God accepts us as we are, not based on what we've achieved or are striving to become, but solely on the ground of Christ's completed work.
Grace-based acceptance.
Fundamentally. And this is profound because it means God accepts us with all our cultural conditioning or family, group, societal influences, even the text says, our predispositions, prejudices, suspicions, and hostilities.
Wow, really as we are.
Really, as we are, God doesn't wait to tidy up our ideas any more than he waits to tidy up our behavior before accepting us sinners into his family.
Oh,
And this leads to the really important realization that all churches are culture churches, including our own.
meaning our faith is always expressed through our culture.
Inevitably. Our Christian mind, our group identity, it's formed by our culture and history, and it continues to be influenced by what was there before because God accepted us within that specific context. It creates a sense that the church truly belongs there, that it's ours, rooted in our soil, our language, our ways of thinking.
Makes it feel authentic and local.
Exactly. It gives it a home. But
There's the other principle.
there's the vital tension. We also have the pilgrim principle. This principle springs just as directly from the gospel, and it states that God accepts us in order to transform us.
Okay. Acceptance leading to change.
Precisely. It's that whisper that reminds us we have no abiding city here. It warns us that faithfulness to Christ will inevitably, at some point, put him out of step with his society.
So it creates friction with the surrounding culture.
It has to. It's not about adopting a whole new foreign culture, shedding your old one entirely. It's more about a profound transformation of the mind towards that of Christ.
A change in perspective, values.
And this implies that no society, whether it's ancient or modern, Eastern or Western, can just painlessly or seamlessly absorb the word of Christ into its existing system without challenge. There will always be rubs and frictions, points of tension, because the gospel demands reevaluation, repentance, change. It calls us beyond our cultural norms.
So these aren't truly contradictory forces then. Indigenizing and pilgrim, they're more like a constant, dynamic, almost creative tension, like stretching something.
Exactly. That's a great way to put it. The text makes it powerfully clear that we need not fear getting too much of one or the other, only too little. We need both.
Why both?
Because both forces are a direct result of the incarnational and translational process whereby God redeems us through the life, death, and resurrection of Christ. Christ's life doesn't just enter a generic human existence. It enters the life of each new community that receives him by faith.
So it becomes real within their specific context.
Yes, and it's realized through all the courses of that community's thoughts and traditions, shaping them from within while also calling them beyond themselves.
This connects to that idea of translation again, doesn't it?
Absolutely. It brings us to this remarkable concept discussed in the book, Christianity's infinite translatability.
Infinite. That's a strong word.
It is, but consider this. Unlike other major faiths, like Islam, which possess an ultimately untranslatable charter document in the Quran, where the Arabic itself is considered the divine word, losing essence in translation.
Right. Translation is interpretation, not the word itself.
Precisely. The Christian faith's scriptures, however, are not only open to translation, they seem to demand it for the faith to spread. But it goes even deeper.
How so?
The very act on which Christian faith rests, the word becoming flesh and pitching tent among us, John's gospel, that is itself the supreme act of translation.
God translating himself into humanity.
Exactly. Anchoring himself in a particular time and place, speaking Aramaic, presumably with a Galilean accent, this divine act of radical translation sets the pattern for the faith itself. It's fundamentally translational.
Okay, I see. That's a powerful idea.
And this fundamental principle of divine translation is what allows Christ to come to the heart of each culture where he finds acceptance, to the burning questions within that culture, and to the very points of reference by which people define themselves and grapple with existence.
Addressing their specific needs and worldview.
Yes. And this is precisely why each phase of Christian history, as we saw with the spaceman, has produced new themes, new theological insights, new spiritual emphases that are specific to that cultural framework.
Like the Irish focus on asceticism or the Lagos focus on power.
Exactly. These themes, stemming from the unique commanding heights of each culture, might even be beyond the conception of Christians of an earlier or another framework of thought. They are fresh insights unlocked by a new cultural lens interacting with the gospel.
So diversity actually enriches the whole.
That's the delightful paradox the book points out. The more Christ is translated into diverse thought forms and national identities, the richer all of us will be in our common Christian identity.
How does that work?
Well, the indigenizing principle creates a place to feel at home, a localized expression of faith that resonates deeply, allowing the gospel to take root without requiring cultural suicide.
Makes it ours.
Yes. But the pilgrim principle ensures that it's not so much at home that no one else can live there. It reminds us we have no abiding city, preventing our localized faith from becoming insular, exclusive, or fatally mistaking its cultural forms for universal, timeless truth.
Keeps it humble, maybe.
And open. In Christ, the source suggests all poor sinners meet. And in finding themselves reconciled with him, they are reconciled to each other, creating a new transcendent commonality across diverse communities, even those seemingly unrecognizable to each other.
That's a truly powerful explanation of that dynamic tension at the heart of Christianity. Okay, here's where it gets, for me, really interesting. If faith is so adaptable to culture, constantly being translated, retranslated into new contexts, what does that mean for theology itself?
The implications for theology, yes.
Our source suggests that theology is inherently occasional and local in character. And it feels like a significant departure from how many might traditionally think of theology as timeless, universal truths.
It is a significant point and a critical one for understanding how Christian thought actually develops. What occasional and local means is that theology doesn't primarily spring from, broad, general, abstract principles developed in a vacuum.
Not just armchair philosophizing.
Not primarily, no. Rather, it emerges out of practical situations. It's born from the actual lived experiences, the urgent questions, the specific challenges faced by believers within their concrete historical context.
Responding to real life.
Exactly. To quote the renowned liberation theologian Gustavo Gutierrez, theology is critical reflection on Christian praxis in the light of the Word.
Praxis meaning action or practice?
Yes, lived faith. In essence, it's about testing your actions by Scripture, examining how you're living out your faith in the world, reflecting on that biblically, and then articulating that understanding. It's a dynamic, responsive process.
Can we see this historically?
Absolutely. Look at the early church. Even the highly intellectual Greek church, which inherited centuries of profound philosophical and rhetorical tradition, took almost 200 years to produce a book of theology written purely for its own sake, a systematic theological treatise.
That would be Origen.
That was Origen, yes, an incredibly influential early theologian, and his work De Principiis. Before that, countless theological books were written, but they were always for a purpose.
What kind of purpose?
To explain the faith to outsiders, maybe defending it to the Roman emperor, or to point out where the writer thought someone else had misrepresented what Christians meant, like in debates with Gnostics or other groups deemed heretical.
So apologetics or polemics?
Largely, yes. Theology was a tool, a responsive act, an articulation born from a specific situation, a specific need, not primarily an abstract system-building exercise, which is a powerful insight into its nature.
How does this connect to, say, African theology today?
Well, if we connect this understanding to the bigger picture of African theology, it becomes abundantly clear that it will act on an African agenda. It's frankly useless for us, from a Western perspective, to try and dictate what an African theology ought to be doing.
Because it arises from their context.
Precisely. It will concern itself with questions that worry Africans, even those questions that might strike Westerners as an oddity or irrelevance.
Like the example given in the book.
Yes, like rules concerning worship during the menstrual period. To some in the West, this might seem peripheral, maybe even archaic. But for certain African Christians, just as it was for the old Hebrews in biblical times, this topic or similar topics related to purity, ritual, community life are major, deeply felt concerns. They need an answer, and specifically an answer related to Christ within their cultural understanding.
So Western irrelevance doesn't mean universal irrelevance.
Not at all. And our source predicts that valid, authentic African biblical theology is likely either to puzzle us or to disturb us.
Puzzle or disturb.
Because, and this is profound, it's not just that different ages and nations see different things in Scripture. It is that they need to see different things. Their cultural context, their history, their pressing concerns shape what they desperately need Scripture to address, what questions they bring to the text, questions we might not even think to ask.
That's fascinating. What are some of those key questions for African theology now?
Well, the source highlights that perhaps the major theological debate in independent Africa today, the number one item on the African theological agenda, seems to be the nature of the African past.
The relationship to pre-Christian heritage.
Exactly. Scholars are grappling with the fundamental question: who am I as an African Christian? What is my relation to Africa's past, to my ancestral heritage in light of Christ? They are wrestling with a theological question for which, frankly, no Western syllabus prepared them, but which is absolutely existential for them.
And this echoes earlier periods of Christian history, you said.
Absolutely draws a clear parallel to those 2nd and 3rd century Hellenistic Christians. They similarly had to grapple with their past, their Greek heritage, in relation to Christ. They had to ask, where was God in our Greek past? What did our philosophers and poets know?
So the same kind of wrestling, different context.
Precisely. The question, where was God in Africa's past, is fundamental for contemporary African theology, and it's leading to powerful affirmative conclusions,
Such
as African Christian scholars recognizing that vernacular pre-Christian names for God, like Niyam among the Akan and Jamo among certain Bantu groups, or Olorun among the Yoruba, are not lesser deities or false gods.
but the same God.
No, they are indeed the God of Scripture, the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ. This clearly distinguishes them from pagan figures like Zeus or Odin, who, in the words of the source, never were.
That's a huge affirmation.
It's incredibly significant. It means the God of the Bible is already present in some way in their ancestral understanding, rather than being an entirely new, foreign deity imposed from the outside. It's a deeply indigenized understanding of God's revelation.
Okay, we've talked about the incarnation as God's supreme act of translation, God translating himself into humanity. But what about the more literal act of Bible translation in this ongoing process? Our source calls it the art of the impossible.
It does, and it feels quite accurate, doesn't it? It's both poetic and captures the immense challenge.
Why impossible?
Because exact transmission of meaning from one linguistic medium to another is continually hampered. It's not just structural differences between languages or cultural gaps. The very words of the receptor language, the one you're translating into, are already preloaded with their own meanings, connotations, histories.
They carry cultural baggage.
Exactly. As the source puts it, the old cargo drags the new into areas uncharted in the source language. The translator can't achieve perfect one-to-one equivalence. They simply have to do their best and take risks in a high-risk business.
Yet it's essential.
Absolutely essential. Bible translation is both a profound reflection of that central act of the incarnation, and it's also a concretization of the commission which Christ gave his disciples to go into all the world.
Making the message accessible.
Its aim is to release the word about Christ so that it can reach all aspects of a specific linguistic and cultural context, allowing Christ to live within that context in the persons of his followers as thoroughly at home as he once did in first century Jewish Palestine.
So the challenges are actually part of the process.
In a way, yes. The endemic hazards and problems of translation, those key words without direct equivalence, the images rooted in the Middle East that need recontextualization, the subtle shifts of meaning, these are actually the means by which the word about Christ is applied to the distinctives of a culture and thus to its commanding heights.
How does that work?
By forcing the translators and the community receiving the translation to wrestle with how biblical concepts relate to their own deepest cultural ideas and values. New translations, by taking the word about Christ into a new area, applying it to new situations, have the potential actually to reshape and expand the Christian faith itself.
Enriching the universal understanding through local engagement.
Precisely. And this stands in manifest contrast, as the book notes, to the concept of the untranslatable Quranic word in Islam, which tends to define a universal safe area of thought. Christian translatability, however, potentially starts interactions of the word about Christ with entirely new areas of thought and custom, continually opening up new vistas for the faith itself.
So the act of translation itself is almost like a conversion process, a conversion for the language and the culture receiving it, a dynamic turning towards Christ.
Yes, that's a brilliant way to put it. And it's precisely what the source suggests. It is indeed a working model of conversion, a turning of the processes of language, and the thought patterns embedded in that language, the traditions carried by it, towards Christ. Mm-hmm. And just like spiritual conversion, it has a beginning but no end. There's always more depth, always more understanding to be found. Yeah. This implies a constant principle of revision.
Meaning translations need updating.
Exactly. As language evolves and society changes, translations must be continually reevaluated and updated to remain relevant, clear, and impactful. It's never a finished task, never good enough in a static sense.
Can we see this principle at work early on?
Beautifully illustrated by the Septuagint, the LXX, that foundational Greek translation of the Hebrew scriptures we mentioned earlier.
Right, the one used by the church at Nicaea.
Yes. Legends surrounded its miraculous origin. The story of 72 translators working for 72 days, each producing identical versions as though dictated by an invisible prompter.
Giving it immense authority.
Immense. It was seen by early Jews, and then crucially by Christians, as manifestly the work of God as the tables given to Moses on Sinai. So early Christianity was already touched by this translation principle from its very inception. Even Jesus' own words, as recorded in the Gospels, come to us primarily in Greek dress.
Not Aramaic directly.
Mostly not. And think of the Pentecost event described in Acts chapter 2. The crowd heard the wonderful works of God in the languages of the various nations that were their real mother tongues.
A reversal of Babel, in a sense.
A profound moment of divine translation in action, making the gospel immediately accessible across linguistic barriers, not confined to the sacred language of the temple liturgy, whether Hebrew or Aramaic.
But Judaism later rejected the Septuagint.
Eventually, yes. The time came when traditional Judaism largely rejected it, most probably the source suggests, because the Christians had got hold of it and were using its particular phrasings to argue effectively for Jesus as the Messiah promised in those scriptures.
So its Christian use became problematic for Judaism.
It seems so. This led eventually to the bald statement that the Torah cannot be turned into Greek, an absolutist stance that Islam would later echo regarding the Quran. But by then, it was too late for the Septuagint. It was already afloat in the world under new colors, firmly in the care of a Christianity that was now as overwhelmingly Hellenistic and Greek-speaking as it had once been overwhelmingly Jewish.
So the translation took on a life of its own within Christianity.
Absolutely. Its translation into Greek and its subsequent embrace by converted Hellenistic Gentiles gave the Hebrew Scriptures a new purpose within a completely new universe of thought. It became the authoritative sourcebook for Greek Christians building a coherent worldview, connecting their new faith to a rich, ancient tradition.
And there was a specific linguistic feature that became important.
Yes, something fascinating happened with the divine name. In the Hebrew Old Testament, God has a personal name, the Tetragrammaton, YHWH.
The 4 letters.
Right. But out of deep reverence, Jewish tradition meant this name was not to be pronounced aloud. In the Septuagint translation, this reverence was concretized. The Tetragrammaton was consistently replaced by the Greek word Kyrios, meaning Lord.
So not a specific name, but a title.
Exactly. So God in the Septuagint has no name in the same way he did in Hebrew. And this, according to the source, was absolutely crucial for the development of an indigenous Hellenistic Christianity.
Why crucial?
Because it allowed Christ, whom the New Testament writers frequently call Kyrios, Lord, to be understood as the Lord, identified with the God of the Hebrew Scriptures, yet accessible to all, not tied to a specific unpronounceable Hebrew name or a particular ethnic heritage. This seemingly small translation choice in the Septuagint became exemplary, a vital direction indicator for the faith's encounter with countless different peoples and cultures down through history.
Okay, we've seen how translation happens, how the gospel embeds itself within cultures through these principles. But how has Christianity's presence actually moved across the globe? You mentioned earlier it wasn't a steady outward march like some other faiths. It felt more dynamic, less predictable.
That's a crucial and very acute observation. Christianity has a really peculiar history of expansion, what the book calls serial expansion.
Serial, meaning one after another.
Kind of, yeah. It contrasts sharply with faiths like Hinduism, which, though incredibly ancient, remains largely geographically static and culturally bound to India, or Islam, which generally expanded steadily outwards from its Arabian heartland, usually retaining the allegiance of the territories it reached, creating a more continuous, recognizable Islamic civilization across vast regions.
Okay, so Christianity is different.
Very different in its pattern. Christian expansion has been serial, with a principal presence in different parts of the world at different times. This means it has often faded in one culture as it is implanted in another, almost like handing off the baton in a relay race.
Losing ground in one place while gaining it elsewhere.
Exactly. There's no single continuous Christian culture or Christian civilization in the same overarching sense that there is an Islamic one. Rather, there have been several distinct ones: Jewish, Hellenistic, Western European, perhaps now Southern Hemispheric, and there may yet be many more. It reflects this serial, adaptive nature.
Can we trace these ages of serial expansion to see the pattern?
Yes, let's do that briefly. The first age was Jewish. For one brief but absolutely vital period, Christianity was entirely Jewish.
As we saw in Jerusalem, 37 CE.
Precisely. The Christians of the first generation were all Jews. They didn't think they had changed their religion by recognizing Jesus as Messiah. They saw him primarily as a Jewish national savior who would fulfill God's promises to Israel, maybe set Israel free from foreign domination.
So very much within Jewish hopes.
Very much. It remains one of the marvels of the ages that Christianity entered its second phase at all, that it broke free of its Jewish cradle.
How did that happen again?
through those unnamed men of Cyprus and Cyrene mentioned in Acts. After being driven from Jerusalem to Antioch, a major Hellenistic city, they took the unprecedented step of introducing Greek-speaking pagans, Gentiles, to Jesus.
A crucial cross-cultural leap.
Absolutely crucial, and it happened just in time. Just before the Jewish state disappeared in those catastrophic Roman wars of AD 70 and 135, when Jerusalem and its temple were destroyed.
If it hadn't spread beyond Judaism by then.
Without that diffusion across cultural lines, the faith would surely have withered away, its principal representatives becoming marginalized groups like the Ebionites, a Jewish Christian sect that eventually faded. Gentile priorities for salvation were quite different. Remember more about the destiny of the individual soul than the political destiny of Israel, but Christ still met them. He convinced both his Jewish and Gentile followers that the answer to their deepest questions lay with him, even when the question and the answer didn't seem to perfectly align at first glance.
That's the adaptability again.
Right. This led directly to the second phase, Hellenistic Roman Christianity. With the shift into the Greek-speaking world, Christianity encountered a total system of thought, a rich philosophical and legal tradition entirely unlike its Jewish origins.
A very different intellectual environment.
Totally. And this era left a permanent, indelible mark on the faith. It fostered the concept of orthodoxy, a canon of right belief capable of being stated in a series of precise propositions arrived at by logical argument and codified in creeds like Nicaea.
The focus on belief, doxy.
Exactly. This was quite alien to traditional Jewish identity, which focused more on what a person is or does on covenantal practice and belonging, rather than primarily on what they believe in abstract terms. However, once Christianity encountered this total Hellenistic system, it had to be permeated and Christianized. It involved wrestling with its ideas, its concepts, its language.
Translating into Greek thought forms.
Yes. The result was logically expounded belief set in codified form, established through councils and consultation, maintained through effective organization. This gave rise to the great theological traditions and instructions of the early church.
Okay, so that phase dominated for centuries. What brought about its end or decline, shifting the center once more?
Two great disruptive historical events. One was widely predicted, or at least feared, the collapse of the Western Roman Empire before the barbarians, the Germanic tribes sweeping across Europe.
The fall of Rome in the West.
Right. The other was utterly unpredictable, the explosive emergence of the Arabs as a world power, driven by the new faith of Islam. They rapidly occupied the old Christian heartlands in the eastern Mediterranean and North Africa, Egypt, Syria, the Levant, North Africa.
Taking over the previous Christian centers.
Exactly. The combination of these forces, barbarian invasions in the West, Islamic conquests in the East and South, led to the dramatic decline of Hellenistic Roman Christianity as the dominant force.
So how did Christianity survive?
That it didn't lead to the slow strangulation of the total Christian presence in the world was, once again, due to the slow, painful, but continuous spread of Christian allegiance among the tribal peoples beyond the old frontiers.
The barbarians themselves.
The very barbarians who had helped bring down the Western Empire. The Goths, the Franks, the Anglo-Saxons, the Celts. Once again, the survival happened only just in time. It was a desperate but ultimately successful pivot that saved Christianity from fading into obscurity as its old heartlands were transformed. Christianity had been saved, again, by its cross-cultural diffusion, finding new homes among new peoples.
Leading to the next phase.
Leading to the third phase, barbarian Western Christianity. The former faith of classical civilization became the religion of, essentially, peasant cultivators and the newly settled Germanic and Celtic tribes across Europe.
A very different social base.
Very. These new Christians, despite their different backgrounds and often limited literacy compared to their Romanized predecessors, gradually accepted much of the classical cultural inheritance passed on through the church, absorbing it into their own nascent traditions.
But did something new emerge here, too?
Yes, a major development occurred, particularly in the West. Western European thought gradually developed a particular consciousness of the individual as a monad, an independent unit, distinct from the tight kinship groups and communal identity that characterized earlier societies.
The rise of individualism.
In a sense, yes. And Christianity in its Western form adapted to and perhaps even contributed to this developing consciousness. It made individual decision and personal faith experience increasingly central, becoming one of the hallmarks of Western Christianity over time.
Contrasting with earlier group conversions.
Contrasting quite sharply with the more communal nature of many early barbarian conversions, where entire tribes or kingdoms often came into the faith together, frequently led by their rulers. It was a subtle yet profound long-term shift in emphasis towards the individual's relationship with God.
Okay, that brings us closer to the modern world. What's the next major shift?
This brings us to the modern shift, perhaps the sixth age of Christian expansion, depending on how you count. When the modern missionary movement began in the 18th and 19th centuries, Europe and North America were undeniably the centers of Christian power, influence, and numerical strength.
The Exeter Hall era reflects that.
Exactly. But today, demographically speaking, Europe and North America are statistically receding in terms of their percentage of the global Christian population.
While Christianity grows elsewhere.
Simultaneously, yes. Everywhere else it is expanding, often rapidly. Sub-Saharan Africa now provides a massive Christian population, a vibrant and growing force shaping the future of global Christianity.
The Lagos picture.
Right. In the Pacific, you find Christian nations of the sort that Europe used to have, where Christianity deeply permeates national identity and public life, not just private belief.
Places like Tonga or Samoa.
For example. And Latin America, with its deep Catholic roots now experiencing vibrant Protestant and Pentecostal growth, holds the largest single Christian culture group globally.
So the center has shifted south.
Overwhelmingly, these new Christian heartlands are in the global south. This vast shift in the Christian constituency, mirroring those previous transformations after the fall of Jerusalem or the Western Roman Empire, is arguably the biggest change happening now. And the source stresses it could not have occurred without that previous cross-cultural diffusion of Christian faith centered in the missionary movement.
So the Victorian missions, despite their flaws, laid the groundwork for this current shift.
They were the catalyst. It's another chapter in this ongoing story of serial, adaptive, and endlessly surprising global journey of the faith.
That's an incredible, almost dizzying sweep of history, highlighting the constant movement and transformation. Now let's zoom in a bit on that modern missionary movement itself, especially how missionaries understood and interacted with other cultures, particularly non-Christian religions.
Okay, shifting focus to the mechanics and mindset of that movement.
Our source explores how one specific biblical passage, Romans chapter 1, played a really significant and sometimes, frankly, problematic role in shaping those interactions.
Ah, yes, Romans 1, verses 18 and following. Paul's argument about humanity suppressing the truth about God, leading to idolatry and moral decline, and incurring God's wrath. It presented a complex challenge for missionaries encountering non-Christian religions firsthand.
How was it interpreted initially?
Well, it wasn't always the primary lens. Early Christian thinkers like Justin Martyr back in the 2nd century didn't rely solely on it. He believed there were more than one type of non-Christian tradition.
Different categories.
Yes. Some, like the popular pagan cults, the gods of the street corner, he saw as palpably devilish, demonic parodies. But others, like the philosophical tradition that often rejected popular religion, were, in his view, potentially compatible with the gospel.
Finding common ground.
He even suggested figures like the Greek philosopher Socrates, who sought truth through reason, the logos, were essentially Christians before Christ. He found himself in a position many later missionaries would inhabit, recognizing both truly opposing and potentially compatible elements in the cultures they encountered. He saw both darkness and flickers of light.
But later interpretations became harsher.
No.
Especially regarding indigenous peoples.
Often, yes. As European colonists encountered Native Americans, particularly in the context of colonial conquest and justification, a different, often harsher view emerged. Romans 1 was then frequently invoked to describe their darkened heart changing the glory of the uncorruptible God into an image.
Linking their religion to the fallen state described by Paul.
Exactly. This perspective often highlighted the insufficiency of unassisted reason, seemingly confirmed by the perceived degraded state of religion observed not just in America, but also in Africa and China from a European viewpoint.
But not all missionaries saw it that way.
No, there was nuance even then. Some early missionaries, like the Puritan John Eliot, who worked intensely with Native Americans in the 17th century, observed that their religion wasn't unrelievedly idolatrous. He found elements he couldn't easily dismiss.
How did he explain those?
He tended to explain them as survivals in debased form of part of the Jewish revelation, suggesting a common, ancient, perhaps even Adamic source of truth that had degenerated over time, a kind of primitive monotheism gone wrong.
Okay. What about the 19th century, the main era of modern missions?
The 19th century saw another shift, perhaps driven more by direct observation on the mission field. As missionaries encountered practices like human sacrifice, the immolation of widows, sati, the pictorial representations of lingam and yoni in places like India.
Things that seemed shocking to Victorian sensibilities.
Deeply shocking. They found these practices recalled Romans 1 more directly from their raw, immediate observation than from abstract theory. The words and phrases of Romans 1.18 onwards just seemed to leap off the page as they described the religions they encountered.
So observation reinforced that interpretation.
It often did, and interestingly, in India, they even found surprising allies among liberal Hindu intellectuals like Rajaram Mohan Roy, who also desired religious reform within Hinduism and condemned some of these practices. Similarly, for many observers in Africa, the continent recalled Romans 1 with descriptions focusing on slavery, widespread drunkenness, perceived immorality, though some missionaries acknowledged that African paganism, despite its imagery, differed significantly from Paul's primary context of highly developed Greco-Roman idolatry.
So a complex picture. How did this interact with new academic ideas?
Well, as the 19th century progressed, these missionary views inevitably collided with new patterns of thought emerging in the West, like theories of the evolution of religion and the developing science of anthropology.
Creating intellectual challenges.
Definitely. Monier Williams, an influential British Sanskrit scholar, for example, initially argued for fragments of truth in all religions, stemming from a primitive monotheism, an idea directly linked to Romans 1.2 REFF, suggesting humanity once knew God but corrupted that knowledge.
Echoing Eliot's earlier idea.
Yes. At one point, Williams even suggested that essential Christian doctrines were present in germ in all religions, just awaiting Christianity as their crown, their fulfillment.
That changed his mind.
He later retracted that, emphasizing a more fundamental gulf between the Bible and other sacred books of the East, becoming more exclusivist in his stance. Others, like the British theologian A.E. Garvey, argued that Paul's primary concern in Romans 1.1, it wasn't really about the origin of religions at all, but simply about the close connection between false views of God and wrong standard of duty. The debate was rich, complex, and ongoing throughout the period.
That's a really deep dive into an academic and theological debate that clearly shaped missionary thinking profoundly. So, what's the core takeaway from all this discussion around Romans 1, beyond the specific historical interpretations and academic arguments? What was the lasting impact, the crucial insight for the missionary movement itself?
I think the crucial insight, according to our source, the one that had the most significant practical impact, is that Paul's concern in Romans 1.18 and following is fundamentally not with systems at all, but with men, with people.
Not judging religions, but human behavior.
Essentially, yes. It is people who hold down the truth of unrighteousness, people who fail to honor God as God and are given up to dishonorable passions. The wrath of God is revealed upon men who commit ungodly and wicked deeds.
Okay, so the focus is on human sinfulness.
Right. The historical tendency among Christians, perhaps understandably, was often to oppose Christianity as a true system to other false systems that seem described or condemned in Romans 1.
Us versus them.
A kind of systemic us versus them. But the text asserts that, wait a minute, Christianity is a term formally identical with the other labels like Hinduism, Buddhism, Islam. It points out that it certainly covers as wide a range of phenomena as most of them, that if the principalities and powers work within human systems, they can and do work within this one too.
Meaning Christians aren't immune to the problems described in Romans 1.
Exactly. That was a profound and humbling realization that man in Christianity lies under the wrath of God just as much and for the same reasons as man in Hinduism, or man anywhere else.
That levels the playing field considerably.
It completely levels the playing field. And this realization, the source argues, saved the earliest generations of the modern missionary movement from the worst sort of paternalism.
How so?
Because it meant humanity was equally fallen everywhere, not just in specific non-Christian contexts. The message of repentance and faith wasn't just for them, it was for everyone, including the missionaries themselves. It fostered a sense of shared human need for God's grace, rather than a sense of inherent superiority.
That's a really vital point.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, beyond these theological debates about understanding other religions, how did missionaries actually operate on the ground? What were their methods? The source highlights medical missions, powerfully calling them the heavy artillery of the missionary army.
It truly is a striking metaphor, isn't it? Famously used, I think, at a student volunteer missionary union conference back in the day. Medical missions were widely seen as indispensable, often the spearhead, breaking down barriers where other forms of outreach simply could not gain traction.
Why were they so effective? What were the reasons?
Several compelling reasons are outlined. First, they were seen as imitative or obedientiary. Missionaries were consciously following Christ's example, who went about doing good, and obeying the clear command Jesus gave his disciples to heal the sick. It was seen as a core part of the mandate.
Following the leader.
Exactly. Second, they were profoundly humanitarian or philanthropic. Just a necessary and compassionate response to the immense physical suffering they encountered in parts of the world often completely devoid of modern medicine or basic health care. You couldn't just ignore it.
A response to obvious need.
Absolutely. Third, they served crucial utilitarian purposes for the mission itself. Medical care significantly reduced the appallingly high rates of missionary mortality from tropical diseases and improved overall efficiency. Healthy missionaries could work longer and more effectively.
Practical consideration.
Very practical. But perhaps most decisively, they served strategic purposes. Medical work often provided an opening, a point of contact and trust, in communities where preaching or other forms of mission couldn't initially gain a hearing due to suspicion or hostility.
The entering wedge, sometimes called.
Sometimes, yes. For example, the source mentions James Lockhart, the first Protestant medical missionary to North China. He found he could only really convey his purpose and gain acceptance after opening his house for free medical treatment, which quickly attracted large crowds who then became open to hearing more.
Building trust through service.
Precisely. Similarly, the Church Missionary Society, CMS, found Kashmir virtually inaccessible to evangelism until a medical man, Dr. Elmsley, provided the needed opening through his compassionate care. Only then could public prayers and preaching to patients begin. The healing opened the door for the message.
These sound like major operations, though, not just first aid kits.
Oh, absolutely. What's fascinating is that these medical missions, though often launched pragmatically, became immensely expensive undertakings. This deep commitment to healing led logically to establishing permanent hospitals.
More than just clinics.
Yes. Then teaching hospitals to train local doctors and nurses, and eventually even full university medical faculties in places like China and India, all furnished and supported primarily through the funds raised by missionary societies back home in the West.
That's a huge investment.
A massive undertaking. These institutions were designed to be a lasting legacy, providing for the work to be continued by indigenous leaders and serving the entire population, regardless of their faith. Even if they placed enormous strain on the financial resources of the supporting societies, it shows the depth of the commitment to holistic care.
So that's the work. What about the missionaries themselves? We often have this image, maybe, of simple, devout figures, perhaps just focused on preaching. But our source suggests many were, almost by accident, scholars, pioneers in linguistics, anthropology, translation.
Absolutely. That stereotype of the simple, perhaps uneducated missionary needs serious revision, especially for the 19th century. In the early decades particularly, many were homespun characters, coming from humble backgrounds, maybe a tailor, a carpenter, a printer, a gardener.
Not necessarily university graduates.
Often not. Many were even considered not ordainable for the established ministry back home in England, lacking the classical university training or the social standing often required by denominations like the Church of England at the time.
So how did CMS manage?
The Church Missionary Society, for instance, initially had to rely heavily on continental, especially German, missionaries from places like the Basel Mission Seminary, simply because they couldn't find enough British recruits who met the Anglican Home Ministry's stringent standards, but were willing to go overseas.
Yet they became scholars. How?
Well, despite these varied backgrounds, theological education was taken seriously from the beginning by most societies. They established training colleges, but perhaps more importantly, the context of their work itself demanded intellectual rigor and skill development.
The situation forced them to learn.
Exactly. In a pioneer situation, often completely isolated, the missionary was faced either with complete ineffectiveness or with a course which would give him, in spite of himself, scholarly instincts and disciplines. They had to learn local languages, often languages that had never even been written down before. This meant doing original linguistic analysis, creating alphabets, compiling dictionaries, translating scriptures, incredibly demanding scholarly work. They had to analyze cultures profoundly different from their own, understand intricate social systems, engage respectfully with other religious traditions on their own terms, simply to be effective communicators.
That sounds like accidental anthropology and linguistics.
It essentially was.
Yeah.
And the impact was significant. A conservative estimate mentioned in the source shows that at least 13% of London Society missionaries became authors of books in English or local languages, and that excludes mere translations. That's a high percentage.
Wow.
Among Church of Scotland missionaries, who perhaps had a stronger tradition of education, nearly a quarter of all ministers who served overseas became authors of significant theological, comparative, descriptive, or historical studies based on their experiences.
So they contributed knowledge back to the West.
Hugely. Many later held highly respected academic posts in the West after returning home, becoming professors of Chinese, comparative religion, African missions, South Asian studies, and so on. So, while the typical missionary might still have seen themselves primarily as a minister or evangelist, their training, and crucially their lived experience in these complex cross-cultural situations, often fostered accidental yet profound scholarship, pushing the boundaries of Western knowledge about the rest of the world.
It seems the missionary movement itself was also shaped by unique structures that emerged to meet these new global demands, particularly in Britain and America. Our source calls the voluntary society one of God's theological jokes. That's a really provocative claim. What does it mean?
It's an intriguing phrase, isn't it? And meant quite seriously, I think. The voluntary society, which developed as this unique organizational form existing outside traditional established church structures, had an absolutely immense impact on Western Christianity and the transformation of world Christianity.
How did it differ from the church itself?
Well, think about classical church structures back in the 18th century, whether they were episcopal, like the Church of England with its bishops and parishes, or Presbyterian, governed by elders and presbyteries and synods, or congregational, emphasizing local church autonomy. These were largely fixed and immutable structures.
They had established ways of doing things.
Exactly. And crucially, they generally had no machinery, no established mechanisms to do the tasks for which missionary societies came into being. Tasks like raising vast sums of money specifically for overseas work, recruiting and vetting candidates for dangerous assignments, managing logistics across continents. The local parish or diocese just wasn't set up for that.
So a new structure was needed.
Yes. And the voluntary society, bringing together committed individuals, often from across denominations, basically subverted all the classical forms of church government by its sheer success and adaptability. It created this parallel, powerful, often more dynamic system for getting things done globally.
Bypassing the old structures.
Effectively, yes. Or working alongside them in sometimes uneasy tension. Think about the practicalities at the start. William Carey, often called the father of modern missions, reasoned very pragmatically for denominational missions, like starting a specific Baptist mission society.
Why denominational?
He believed it would simply be more likely for good to be done by each denomination engaging separately, because they already had existing cohesion, shared identity, established networks. It was practical.
Makes sense.
Yet contrast that with the London Missionary Society, LMS, founded shortly after Carey's initiative. It was a pioneering, non-denominational organization. Its famous fundamental principle was simply to send the glorious gospel of the blessed God to the heathen, explicitly leaving decisions about church government and specific forms of worship to the converts themselves in their own contexts.
Letting the local church decide its own shape.
Exactly. One of its founders famously called this principle the funeral of bigotry, a radical idea for the time, aiming to unite Christians from mission beyond their home country's squabbles. These societies were revolutionary in structure and often in spirit.
How did they engage ordinary people?
That was another key innovation. They embraced the masses of the people. They fostered widespread local participation through countless auxiliary associations, local branches of CMS or LMS or others, meeting in towns and villages, collecting pennies, praying, disseminating information. This deeply rooted the movement nationally, beyond just the elites or clergy.
Grassroots involvement.
Massive grassroots involvement. And this dramatically changed recruitment patterns, drawing missionaries from broader social classes and enabling recruitment even for dangerously high mortality fields where many missionaries died young. The societies provided the support network.
And how did these societies evolve over time?
Well, as the source notes, these societies were often designed initially for one-way traffic, for sending resources out, for giving the gospel to others. But over time, especially in the 20th century, they evolved dramatically. They became vital channels for two-way traffic, facilitating global partnerships, administering aid, exchanging personnel, managing complex development projects, channeling money, materials, technical expertise in both directions. They often grew far beyond their initial purely evangelistic purpose.
Adapting to new needs and realities.
Exactly. They illustrate how new, flexible structures emerged to meet needs that traditional, fixed church forms simply could not accommodate, fundamentally reshaping the landscape of global Christian outreach and interaction.
Now, for the specifically American dimension of this, our source includes a really surprising, quite pointed critique from a Japanese Christian leader, Kanzo Uchimura. Writing back in 1926, he said that Americans themselves know all too well that their genius is not in religion.
Ouch! That is blunt, isn't it? Especially coming from someone like Uchimura.
Who was he exactly?
Kanzo Uchimura, 1861 to 1930, was a highly respected first-generation Japanese Christian, a prominent intellectual, writer, and founder of the non-church movement in Japan. He was actually converted and deeply influenced by American missionaries, whom he personally respected greatly. So his critique wasn't born of anti-Americanism.
Okay, so what did he mean? If their genius isn't religion, what is it?
He observed that while Americans were great in building cities and railroads, great inventors of things like the telegraph and automobile, and great adepts in the art of enjoying life to the utmost, their core cultural genius, he felt, was fundamentally practical, material, organizational, not in religion.
Focused on the tangible.
Yes. He felt they focus obsessively on numbers, how they value numbers, seeing big churches as synonymous with successful churches, and aiming to win the greatest number of converts with the least expense. Efficiency and result.
A business-like approach.
That's how he saw it. He concluded, rather starkly, that Americans were essentially children of this world, perhaps the least religious among all civilized peoples, highly suited for earthly life and achievement, but maybe less attuned to the heavenly or the deeply spiritual in his view. Again, he wasn't necessarily insulting them. He was making a keen observation about their core cultural character and priorities as he perceived them.
So how does this relate to American missions?
Well, the source points out that, flowing from this, American missions are thus both products and purveyors of American culture. America, with its incredible economic capability, its sheer wealth and resources, combined with its favorable social and political climate, including that strong tradition of voluntary associations and religious freedom, provided the perfect conditions for these voluntary mission societies to flourish and operate overseas on an unprecedented scale, especially in the 20th century.
The scale of American missions became huge.
Immense. This also led, the source suggests, to what's described as the atomization of the church in the American context. The line between the institutional church and the specialized voluntary society or parachurch organization became increasingly blurred.
What does atomization mean here?
Imagine a strong, unified tree. Instead of all its branches remaining clearly connected to the central trunk, some grew so large and independently that they started to feel like separate plants, each with its own roots, its own specific purpose, its own fundraising. That's a bit like what happened. The lines blurred so much that the local church itself often began to function as just one more voluntary association among many, each competing for allegiance and resources, each focused on its own specific mission or cause, leading to fragmentation.
Okay. And what characterized this distinctively American approach to missions?
Several things stand out. Vigorous evangelism, definitely. A remarkable readiness of invention and innovation. A willingness to make the fullest use of contemporary technology, finance, organization, and business methods.
The business of missions idea again.
Very much so. It was often explicitly called the business of missions, approached with strategic planning, marketing, and efficiency metrics, quite unlike many European missions that often feared mammon and stressed sacrifice, being more hesitant about overt fundraising or appearing too wealthy or organized. American religious culture, by contrast, generally had no inhibitions about money and saw no inherent contradiction between good business practice and piety.
Were there theological factors too?
Yes, the source also touches upon the significant influence of Scottish common sense philosophy on much of American theology, particularly in the 19th century. This tended to lead to a focus on statements of belief as catalogs of unconditioned fact, things that could be rationally proven, objectively listed, and definitively catalogued.
Making faith very propositional.
Very propositional. This resulted in the proliferation of new extended creeds as tests for fellowship and a basis of separation. Minor doctrinal differences, articulated with great precision, could become grounds for starting a new denomination or mission society, which further contributed to that atomization of the church we talked about.
So putting it all together.
The conclusion is that there is indeed a specifically American Christianity, a distinct cultural expression shaped by its unique historical and social context. But, and this is the crucial balancing point, the source immediately reminds us that no one ever meets universal Christianity in itself. We only ever meet Christianity in a local form, and that means a historically, culturally conditioned form.
Like the Greek, Celtic, or Nigerian forms we saw.
Exactly. There's nothing wrong with having local forms of Christianity, provided that we remember that they are local. Uchimura's critique, while sharp, serves as a powerful reminder that even the most familiar or dominant expressions of faith, like American evangelicalism, are themselves specific cultural adaptations rooted in a particular time and place, not the universal norm.
That's a fascinating and perhaps necessary self-reflective lens to put on the movement. This leads us beautifully then to a deeper look at African Christianity, which our source presents as perhaps the most significant recent transformation in the global Christian landscape, truly embodying this idea of indigenous faith taking deep, authentic root.
It truly is presented as a paradigm of indigenous faith, a powerful illustration of that indigenizing principle really taking hold and flourishing. Modern African Christianity, as the source makes strikingly clear, is emphatically not just a missionary creation and not merely a passive import from the West.
It has its own internal dynamism.
Absolutely. It is principally sustained by Africans themselves and, crucially, to a surprising extent, the result of African initiatives. This directly counters a common, often lingering misconception that it was simply a Western export that somehow took. It's a vibrant, internally driven phenomenon with deep African roots.
Are there specific examples of this African initiative?
Oh, yes. Several striking examples are given that really demonstrate this. Think about Sierra Leone, for instance. The very first Protestant church established in tropical Africa wasn't actually a European or American mission creation at all.
Really? Who started it then?
It was established by freed slaves arriving from Nova Scotia in 1792. Many of these were African Americans who had fought for the British during the American Revolution and were resettled. They arrived already Christians, bringing their own vibrant Baptist and Methodist faith traditions, their hymns, their preachers. They had already been functioning as organized churches for nearly 20 years back in North America.
So they brought Christianity with them. They weren't just recipients.
Exactly. They even famously ejected one early white missionary sent to oversee them, judging him too proud for a Methodist preacher, demonstrating their strong sense of self-governance and what the source calls their American Republic spirit. And Sierra Leone then became a significant source of African missionaries spreading the faith to other parts of West Africa, an early African sending hub.
Wow. What about elsewhere?
In Uganda, after the initial work by European missionaries, it was largely Gonda evangelists, Africans themselves, often operating far from their home region and thus considered foreign missionaries, within other Ugandan or East African contexts, who carried the work forward with incredible zeal and effectiveness.
African missionaries to other Africans.
Predominantly, yes. And then you have the powerful stories of truly charismatic African leaders who spearheaded massive Christian movements, often entirely outside formal mission structures, sometimes even in tension or opposition to them.
Who are some examples?
The book highlights figures like Samson Opong. He was a former jailbird in Ashanti, Ghana, illiterate, who had a prophetic dream calling him to preach. Within just 5 or 6 years in the early 20th century, he led an estimated 20,000 people to convert to Christianity, a truly explosive indigenous movement connected initially with Methodism but driven by his personal charisma.
Incredible numbers.
Then there's Joseph Babalola, who is a steamroller driver for the Public Works Department in Nigeria. After experiencing a divine imperative during an engine breakdown in 1928, he became a key figure in a massive revival movement that swept across Yorubaland, emphasizing prayer, healing, and spiritual power, leading to the formation of the Christ Apostolic Church.
From steamroller driver to revival leader.
Amazing story. And perhaps most spectacular of all is Simon Kimbengu in the Belgian Congo. He was a Baptist catechist who, after receiving visions, began an intense preaching and healing ministry in 1921. It lasted only a few months before the Belgian colonial authorities arrested him, fearing his influence, and jailed him for life.
So his ministry was cut short.
His public ministry was, but the movement he founded, Kimbanguism, continued to grow explosively underground and after his death. Today, the Kimbanguist Church has over 5 million members, maybe many more, and became a powerful indigenous Christian expression deeply intertwined with the Congolese independence movement.
Growing despite suppression.
Exactly. These figures, and many others like them, often claimed a direct commission from God imparted by dream or vision and confirmed by signs following. They profoundly shaped African expressions of faith, making it authentically African, rooted in local spiritual experiences, not just mimicking mission patterns.
Why did Christianity resonate so deeply in these contexts?
Well, the source suggests it often became a vital means for Africans to adapt to burdensome and potentially dangerous situations created by colonialism and rapid social change. Traditional wisdom often lacked answers to new, shattering phenomena like the ecological and social disruption caused by huge dams, the bewildering complexities of a new cash economy, or devastating new diseases appearing.
So it offered a new framework for understanding and coping.
Yes, the search for a new key to life is surely a thoroughly religious motive, even if traditional missionary preaching hadn't initially prioritized these specific existential crises faced by Africans. Christianity offered a powerful new source of meaning, hope, and practical power to navigate a rapidly changing, often threatening world.
Did this clash with missionary expectations?
Often it did. As we touched on, early missionaries frequently held what the source calls a Black European ideal, the expectation that African Christians would essentially adopt European norms in everything. Clothes, hymns sung in English or translated literally, maybe learning Latin for high church traditions, high levels of Western literacy, basically becoming respectable, civilized carbon copies of Western believers.
Assimilation as the goal.
That was often the implicit, sometimes explicit goal. Samuel Crowther, that remarkable Yoruba man rescued from a slave ship who became the first African Anglican bishop, addressing public meetings in excellent English and meeting Queen Victoria, was seen by many Europeans as the embodiment of this ideal achieved.
But this ideal was challenged.
Deeply challenged, especially by later generations of African Christians and theologians. As we discussed earlier, African Christian scholars today are powerfully asking, where was God in Africa's past? They are recognizing that vernacular pre-Christian names for God like Katonda among the Ganda, Naime among the Akan, or Olorun among the Yoruba are not simply primitive deities to be discarded.
But the true God.
They are profoundly the God of Scripture. This parallels, as we said, how 2nd and 3rd century Hellenistic Christians wrestled with their Greek philosophical past, seeking to find continuity between their ancestral understanding of the divine and the God revealed fully in Christ and Scripture. It's about finding God already present, not just newly arrived.
And what about healing? You mentioned that's so central in many African churches, often distinguishing them from much of Western Christianity.
Yes, that's a vital, distinctive emphasis. The African Independent Churches, or AICs as they're often called, made what the source sees as a completely logical connection. If a Christian truly trusts Christ for salvation, they should also trust Christ for the healing of their body, healing that they previously sought from traditional powers, diviners, or healers.
Integrating faith into the physical realities of life.
Directly. Prophet William Wade Harris, an incredibly influential Liberian prophet and evangelist who swept through Ivory Coast and Ghana around 1913-1915, gave revolutionary advice to his tens of thousands of converts when they asked what to do when sick. He apparently told them, take native medicine if you have to, but while you gather the leaves, pray to God. While you prepare the medicine, pray to God. When you take it, pray to God.
So not rejecting traditional remedies entirely, but reorienting the source of power.
Exactly. This, crucially, bypassed the traditional specialist, the witch doctor, the diviner, the traditional healer entirely. It transferred the locus of power and authority for healing directly to Christ, accessed through prayer, even while potentially using familiar physical means. A brilliant integration.
What about these AICs, the independent churches? How should we understand them? Are they sects?
That's a complex question. While they were once often dismissed by Western scholars or mission churches as sects, syncretistic, or somehow less authentic, The source argues the distinction between independent and older or mission-founded churches in Africa is often exaggerated and sometimes unhelpful.
The lines are blurry.
Very blurry. Many forms of African Christianity, whether technically independent or within mainline denominations, are, in a broad sense, new religious movements. Why? Because they are actively reworking the old and the new, integrating biblical faith with African cultural realities and spiritual sensibilities to create expressions of Christianity that feel thoroughly at home within African contexts.
What are some common features of these churches, particularly the AICs?
Several features are often noted. The prominence of dreams and visions as legitimate sources of divine revelation and guidance, something that's actually significant in many mainline African churches too, not just AICs. The importance of communal meals, which have sometimes flourished separately from the formal Eucharist, especially where mission churches imposed strict sacramental restrictions based on Western norms, like monogamy or levels of instruction. And perhaps most distinctively, a dynamic combination of the ritual and hierarchical with the charismatic and spontaneous. Meaning they often have elaborate liturgies, distinct uniforms, clear leadership structures, the hierarchical ritual side, but also embrace ecstatic worship, prophecy, spontaneous prayer, healing, the charismatic spontaneous side. This blend, the source suggests, reflect African life itself, which is often both highly ordered by tradition and kinship, yet also deeply improvisatory and open to immediate spiritual experience and intervention.
It's truly fascinating how Christianity interacts with these existing cultures, both transforming them and being transformed by them. Our source then takes a step back to look at something even more foundational, primal religions. It emphasizes that these are often the historical background from which most large movements into Christian faith have always come.
Yes, this is a really important section for understanding the deep soil from which much of global Christianity, especially outside the modern West, has sprung.
What exactly are primal religions? Is that like primitive?
No, the source is careful about that. Primal here isn't a euphemism for primitive, and it carries absolutely no evolutionary undertones suggesting they're somehow less developed or destined to disappear. Instead, the term primal is used because it helpfully underlines two features: their historical anteriority and their basic elemental status in human experience.
Okay, anteriority meaning they came first historically.
Yes, in many regions, they predate the arrival of the major world religions like Christianity or Islam, and elemental status, meaning they deal with fundamental human experiences of life, death, nature, community, the sacred, in ways that resonate deeply across cultures.
So they're foundational.
Foundational. The source makes the bold claim that these primal ways of seeing the world actually underlie all the other faiths and often exist in symbiosis with them. It even suggests that, in a way, everyone, even secular moderns, are primalists underneath. We all have fundamental ways of relating to the sacred, to community, to place, to the rhythms of life that resonate with these ancient traditions, even if we don't consciously identify with them. They continue, sometimes transformed or submerged, within cultures heavily influenced by major world religions.
Are they simple nature worship?
Definitely not simple. They have complex structures. They aren't just about a supreme being, although many do have a concept of a high god. They often involve a whole range of spiritual realities, other divinities, nature spirits, ancestors who retain influence, objects or places imbued with spiritual power. And these are arranged in different, sometimes overlapping patterns depending on the specific culture.
Can you give examples of these patterns?
The source identifies a few helpful conceptual patterns, though reality is always messy. You might find a God-dominated system where worship and ultimate power are clearly focused on a supreme being. Then there's what's called relative theism, where the path to the divine or the experience of divine power is primarily through other intermediary beings, ancestors, spirits who are seen as modes or extensions of the supreme being. And then there are ancestor-dominated systems where the deceased elders hold the most significant day-to-day spiritual power, or systems where impersonalized power, like mana or life force residing in things or people, seems most dominant.
And one society can mix these.
Absolutely. What's truly remarkable and often confusing to outsiders looking for neat categories is that the same society may produce examples of all three attitudes, monotheistic, polytheistic, pantheistic, without any sense of the perceptions being incompatible. It's often very fluid. And the key is that living religion in these contexts is intimately likely to relate intimately to the basis of livelihood within a community, deeply interwoven with farming cycles, hunting, fishing, kinship structures, healing practices. It's not separate from daily life.
How are these primal religions changing today? They must be under pressure.
Immense pressure, yes.
Yeah.
Often driven by the forces of modernization and globalization, the source highlights several key pressures. Globalization itself means religious thinking is no longer confined to being purely local and ethnic. Ideas travel, people move, cutting across the old obligation of common custom for a common kin.
The world shrinking.
Exactly. The rise of new nation states, especially post-colonially in Africa and the Pacific, has often required diverse peoples within artificial borders to establish new national identities. This frequently involves affirming the shared past, which includes traditional religion, sometimes elevating it to a national symbol.
Politics and religion intertwined.
Often, yes. Then there's economic development. Western models emphasizing cash economies, industrialization, wage labor, and consequent population movements to urban centers fundamentally disrupt traditional value systems, break the ancestral link with the land, and lead to widespread social disease, often creating a vacuum that new religious movements, including forms of Christianity or Islam, fill.
The old ways don't fit the new economy.
And finally, political pressures. Even when legislative changes are made, like banning practices such as human sacrifice or witchcraft accusations, religions often adapt, finding surrogates or continuing practices underground. But these external pressures force change and evolution.
So how do primal religions respond to all these intense pressures? Do they just disappear?
Rarely do they just disappear entirely, though they certainly transform. The source outlines several ingenious strategies of response. One common response is outright conversion, often to a world religion like Christianity or Islam. Interestingly, this is sometimes a means of maintaining the identity of a tribal people who feel under threat of absorption by a larger, dominant majority culture. By converting as a group to a world religion, they gain a new, larger identity that helps protect their distinctiveness.
Conversion as a survival strategy.
It can be, yes. A second response is restatement. Contact with Christianity or Islam forces primal traditions into internal reflection and re-explanation, often making them more systematic or theological in dialogue or contrast with the incoming faith. We saw that example of the Anlo elder in Ghana re-explaining the complex nature of Mawu, the supreme being, in a way that responded to Christian presence, shaping his own tradition's articulation.
Defining themselves against the newcomer.
Or in conversation with them. Third, invention. Sometimes you see conscious efforts to create new, universal, religious alternatives based on primal roots, but designed to transcend purely local or ethnic boundaries, sometimes with nationalistic aims. Like Africana in Ghana, founded by a former Catholic priest aiming to create a pan-African traditional religion.
Creating something new from the old.
Fourth, adjustment. This involves incorporating new phenomena, like Western goods or technologies, into existing cosmological frameworks. The classic example is the Melanesian cargo cults, which interpreted the arrival of Western material goods, cargo, within their existing beliefs about ancestors returning with riches, leading to rituals designed to attract more cargo. Looks bizarre to outsiders, but logical within their framework.
Fitting the new into the old worldview.
Fifth, revitalization. This is a conscious search for roots, particularly visible among indigenous minority peoples like Native Americans or Australian Aboriginals who feel their culture is threatened. They actively reclaim and revive traditional institutions, rituals, and beliefs like the Sweat Lodge or the Vision Quest, often developing a pan-Indian or pan-Aboriginal focus that builds a larger identity transcending narrow ethnic groups.
Reclaiming heritage.
Yes. And finally, sixth, appropriation. This is when Westerners, often disillusioned with modernity or driven by environmental concerns, adopt or value aspects of primal worldviews, seeking spiritual meaning. Though the source notes this is sometimes done in somewhat bizarre and unrealistic terms that romanticize or misunderstand the depth and complexity of these traditions.
So lots of dynamic interaction.
Absolutely. All of this just demonstrates the ongoing, complex, dynamic interaction of primal worldviews, the universal faiths, and the modern world, showing how deeply interconnected and mutually influential our global religious landscapes truly are. Primal religions are not just relics of the past, they are active participants in the present.
What an incredible journey that was, charting this course through the historical and cultural landscape of Christianity. It's just so clear from this deep dive into the source material that this is a faith that is anything but static or singular. It's profoundly dynamic, constantly moving.
Indeed, it really underscores that point, doesn't it? We've seen how Christianity, perhaps uniquely among major faiths in this specific way, has consistently transformed itself as it crosses cultural frontiers. This pattern of serial, generational, and vernacular penetration of different cultures, as the book puts it, is absolutely central to its historical survival and its remarkable global spread.
That tension driving it.
That constant tension, yes, between being at home in a culture through that indigenizing principle, and yet always being a pilgrim called beyond that culture towards transformation in Christ, driven by the pilgrim principle. That dynamic has fueled its extraordinary diversity, yet somehow, miraculously perhaps, preserved its core coherence across millennia.
And this leads us inevitably to a crucial point about how we understand Christianity today, right here, right now. We've seen so clearly how every expression of faith, from Jerusalem in 37 CE to London in the 1840s to Lagos in 1980, and yes, even your own local expression of faith wherever you are listening, is always by its very nature historically, culturally conditioned.
It can't be otherwise. And this raises a really important, maybe challenging question for you, the listener, to reflect on.
Yeah.
If we truly recognize that Christianity in any context is always a local form, shamed by its particular time and place, what did that mean for our assumptions about universal Christianity?
What happens when we forget that our form is local?
What does it mean when one local form, perhaps our own, the one most familiar to us, begins to insist that its particular features, its specific interpretations, its cultural expressions have universal validity, that they should be the norm for all Christians, everywhere, for all time?
That seems to run counter to everything we've just discussed about adaptation and translation.
It does. And the source suggests that the modern missionary movement itself, which, as we saw, was often initially designed for one-way traffic, for sending, for giving, now faces a crucial obligation in our interconnected world.
An obligation to change.
An obligation, perhaps, to use means better fitted for two-way traffic, fellowship, for sharing, for receiving. This implies a profound shift in mindset, doesn't it? Moving from simply exporting our version to engaging in genuine partnership and mutual learning with the global church in all its diversity.
From monologue to dialogue.
Beautifully put. So as you reflect on this deep dive, maybe consider how this profound history of cultural translation and constant adaptation could reshape your own understanding of Christian faith, and perhaps how you engage with its diverse, complex, ever-evolving global presence in the world today.
It's a story not just of transmission across unchanging lines, but of perpetual transformation and potentially mutual enrichment, isn't it?
I think that captures it perfectly. A faith forever being translated, forever finding new homes, and forever challenging those homes to look towards Christ.
Yeah.